I found out I owned Mill Lake the same way most life-changing things happen, quietly, buried inside paperwork that almost got ignored. The letter arrived 2 weeks after the funeral, mixed in with condolences and bank statements. At first glance, it looked like another legal notice, heavy cream envelope, embossed seal. I opened it at the kitchen table, coffee going cold beside me, and skimmed until one line made me stop breathing. Full transfer of water rights and shoreline ownership for Mill Lake. Mill Lake. The name hit harder than I expected. That lake had been there my entire life, tucked behind a row of houses and walking paths, always described as community-managed and shared access. Kids fished there. Dog walkers circled it every evening. The HOA bragged about it in every newsletter. But according to this document, it had never belonged to them. I read the letter again. Then a third time. The estate attorney confirmed it an hour later. The lake, every inch of shoreline, the dam, the access road easement, had been in my family for 3 generations. The HOA had been using it, managing it, policing it, but never owning it. I drove out to Mill Lake that afternoon. Nothing looked different, but suddenly everything did. The no boats after dusk signs. The HOA rules posted on the dock. The little keypad gate on the gravel road that everyone treated like public property. I parked and walked the shoreline slowly, phone in my pocket, mind racing. If this was true and all the paperwork said it was, then the HOA had been exerting authority they didn't legally have for years. I hadn't even reached the dock before someone shouted at me. "Hey, you can't park there." A man in a reflective HOA vest jogged toward me, clipboard already out. He looked annoyed, like I'd interrupted his routine. "This area's restricted," he said. "HOA managed property. Residents only." I smiled politely. "I'm the owner." He laughed. "Sure you are." I pulled out the letter, the map, the deed extract. His smile faded fast. "This must be a mistake," he said. "The HOA's always controlled the lake." "Controlled," I replied, "isn't the same as owned." He stepped back, clearly unsure what to do next. So he did what HOAs always do when authority gets questioned. He called the police. 2 cruisers showed up within 10 minutes. The officer listened, looked at the paperwork, and then asked the HOA rep a question that changed the air completely. "Can you show me a deed proving this lake belongs to the HOA?" The man couldn't. The officer handed my papers back. "Sir, you're within your rights to be here." The HOA rep's face went tight. This isn't over. He was right. Because what I hadn't told him yet, what he didn't know, was that this inheritance came with something much more powerful than a piece of land. It came with water rights. And with one filing, everything they thought they controlled was about to disappear. The HOA didn't waste any time spinning the story. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing with forwarded emails and screenshots from neighbors. An urgent notice had gone out claiming there was a temporary ownership dispute over Mill Lake and that all residents should continue using the lake as normal until the HOA's legal team resolved it. They even warned that unauthorized individuals might try to restrict access. Unauthorized individuals. That was me. I forwarded the email straight to my attorney. He called back 10 minutes later, and the first thing he said was, "They just handed us leverage." Apparently, the moment they acknowledged a dispute and still encouraged access, they crossed a line. Not only were they asserting control over property they didn't own, they were now directing people onto it, creating liability. Drownings, injuries, environmental damage. All of it would land on me as the legal owner. That was the moment I realized how reckless they were being. We met that afternoon. He spread out the documents again, old surveys, water rights filings, handwritten easements from the 1940s. Mill Lake wasn't just a body of water. It was classified as a privately controlled reservoir under state law. That meant access, usage, and even shoreline walking were privileges granted by the owner. And the HOA had none of that in writing. "Here's the thing," my lawyer said, tapping the page. "They can argue about land all day. But water rights? That's a different animal. This trumps their rules entirely." He explained the filing. One form. One submission to the county and the state water authority. A formal declaration of ownership and revocation of implied access. Once recorded, the HOA's community lake language would legally collapse. That night, I drove back to Mill Lake. People were still there, fishing, picnicking, letting their dogs splash in the shallows. I didn't confront anyone. I just watched. This wasn't their fault. They'd been told a story for years. The dock creaked under my boots as I stepped onto it. I noticed the HOA's logo burned into the wood, the faded safety rules nailed to the railing. All of it had been installed without permission, without lease, without agreement. I took photos of everything. The next morning, my attorney filed the paperwork. No drama. No meeting. No warning. Just one filing. By lunchtime, the county recorder stamped it. By afternoon, the water authority acknowledged it. And by evening, Mill Lake was no longer a community amenity. It was private property with enforceable water rights. The HOA president called me just after sunset. "You blindsided us," he snapped. "You never had permission," I replied. "This lake serves hundreds of families. Then you should have secured rights before advertising it." He went quiet. Then, "You can't just cut people off." "I didn't," I said calmly. "The law did." What he didn't realize yet was how fast those consequences would move. Because once water rights are clarified, enforcement follows. And the HOA had been trespassing for years. The signs went up the next morning. Clean. Simple. Legal. Private lake. No unauthorized access. By noon, the HOA office was in chaos. Residents were calling nonstop, confused and angry. The keypad gate at the access road had been disabled, not broken, just deactivated. The dock entrance was chained with a county-compliant notice attached, citing the recorded filing and water rights statute. Everything was done by the book. The HOA tried to respond the only way it knew how: intimidation. Around 2 p.m., 2 patrol cars rolled in again. Different officers this time. Same routine. They listened, reviewed the documents, and then walked the shoreline with me while the HOA president hovered nearby, visibly sweating. One officer turned to him and said, "You've been directing residents onto private water without a lease or easement." The president opened his mouth, then closed it. "That's a problem," the officer continued. "A big one." That's when the tone shifted. This wasn't a civil disagreement anymore. It was liability. The HOA's lawyer arrived 30 minutes later, tie loosened, phone glued to his ear. He tried to argue implied access, customary use, community reliance, precedent. My lawyer shut it down with one sentence. Implied access ends the moment ownership and water rights are formally recorded. The officers nodded. They'd heard it before. By evening, the HOA sent out a second email. This one was very different. Effective immediately. All resident access to Mill Lake is suspended pending legal review. No apology. No explanation. Just panic wrapped in legal language. That night, something unexpected happened. People started knocking on my door. Not angry. Curious. Nervous. Families who'd lived here for years, who genuinely believed the lake was communal. A few apologized for things they hadn't even known were wrong. Bonfires, jet skis, parties that went late into the night. I listened. I explained. I showed them the documents. Most understood. Some didn't. But the real damage hit the HOA the next day when the county inspector showed up. Turns out, when you claim management over a body of water, you assume responsibility for safety, maintenance, and environmental compliance. The HOA had filed none of the required reports. No dam inspection records. No runoff controls. No aquatic management permits. They'd been operating in a legal vacuum. The inspector took photos. Lots of them. By afternoon, the HOA received a notice of violation. Then another. Then a third. Each one carried fines. Daily fines. The HOA board held an emergency closed-door meeting that night. Word leaked anyway. Their insurance carrier had been notified. And insurers hate unpermitted lakes. By the end of the week, the HOA wasn't asking how to get access back anymore. They were asking how to survive the fallout. Because one filing had done more than cut off access. It had exposed everything they'd been pretending to control. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It unraveled in pieces, emails, inspections, quiet resignations, but everyone could feel it. The HOA's insurance carrier was the first to make it official. They sent a notice stating that any claims related to Mill Lake were excluded immediately due to undisclosed ownership and unpermitted management. Translation: if anything happened near that lake, the HOA was on its own. That sent shockwaves through the board. Without insurance, they couldn't operate. Not safely. Not legally. And certainly not with a history of directing residents onto land they didn't own. The HOA president called me again. This time, his voice was different. No anger. No bluster. Just strain. "We need to talk," he said. So, we did, lawyers present, of course. They came with proposals. Leases. Shared access agreements. Promises of maintenance and oversight. Even revenue sharing from community dues. My attorney listened, took notes, and then slid one document across the table. A trespass accounting. It listed years of unauthorized use, installations without permission, environmental impact, and management claims made in HOA marketing. The total wasn't just financial, it was legal exposure. "You've benefited from this lake for years," my lawyer said. "Without rights. Without permits. Without liability coverage." The room went quiet. One board member finally spoke. "What do you want?" I didn't hesitate. "I want distance," I said. "Permanent. No shared access. No HOA signage. No implied authority. The lake would remain private unless I personally granted permission, and that permission would never run through the HOA." They tried one last angle. Community pressure. Petitions. Emotional appeals. "This will destroy property values," someone said. I looked around the table. "You destroyed trust first." That afternoon, something symbolic happened. The HOA workers removed their signs from a shoreline. The community lake banners came down. The rules boards were unscrewed. The dock was unbranded. Neighbors watched quietly as the illusion peeled away. Then the county issued its final blow. A compliance order demanding immediate cessation of all HOA-related lake activities and requiring remediation for unpermitted modifications. The HOA was given 30 days to respond, or face escalating penalties. They didn't fight it. They couldn't. Because every move they'd made, every email, every rule, every claim of authority was now documented as overreach. By the time the sun set, Mill Lake was quiet in a way it hadn't been in years. No whistles. No patrols. No HOA vests. Just water, finally answering to the law instead of a clipboard. And the HOA? They were running out of places to hide. The final filing went through on a Friday afternoon. No hearing. No press. Just a recorded agreement and a stamped acknowledgement from the county that changed everything permanently. The HOA formally relinquished all claims, access, and authority over Mill Lake, now and forever. In exchange, I released them from further civil action related to past use. Not because they deserved mercy, but because the damage had already been done where it mattered most. Their power. The consequences rippled fast. The HOA rewrote its bylaws. Newsletters quietly removed any mention of the lake. Property listings stopped advertising lake access. Insurance premiums spiked. 2 board members resigned within a week, citing personal reasons. Everyone knew better. What used to be their crown jewel had become their biggest liability. A month later, I stood on the shoreline at sunset, watching the water settle into that glassy calm you only get when no one's rushing it. No boats. No crowds. Just quiet. A neighbor walked over, same guy who'd lived here since before the HOA existed. He nodded toward the lake. "Feels different," he said. "It is," I replied. He hesitated. "You going to let people back in?" "Individually," I said. "Respectfully." He smiled. "That's fair." And that was the point. This had never been about locking people out. It was about putting the law back where it belonged, above assumptions, above convenience, above unchecked authority. The HOA didn't lose access because I wanted revenge. They lost it because they never had it to begin with. One filing didn't just shut a gate. It exposed years of overreach, forced accountability, and reminded everyone that ownership isn't what you claim in a newsletter. It's what you can prove on paper. Mill Lake had been treated like a prop. Now it was protected. And every time the water moves quietly against the shore, it carries the same lesson. Power fades. Records remain.